Welcome back. I'm going to try to solve some more chess puzzles today because I do need the practice. But one interesting thing I wanted to note before I began is that just yesterday, for just a little while, maybe an hour or two, my rapid rating was ahead of my daily rating, which is very interesting. My daily rating has long been my highest rating on both chess.com and Lichess, perhaps because you can spend more time, as much time as you want, really, trying to figure out what the move is. But my rapid rating had been rising and rising, whereas my daily rating had been hovering. And when my rapid rating reached its peak, my daily, about the same time, I lost a couple of daily games and it actually dropped below it for just a little bit. That didn't last, but it was interesting. Okay, well, let's just get right into these puzzles. I have been working my way back up from the beginning, from the lower rated puzzles, trying to, I guess review is the word. This looks like I would have a checkmate here, except that knight is guarding the square. So I'm thinking I can remove that knight. That's a check, so it would force them to either take back with the pawn or the bishop, and then I would have checkmate here. Okay. It took me a second to see that. And what I was trying to say as I started the puzzle is that the reason that I went back to start at the beginning, I reset my puzzle rating. It was because once I reached about 2,300 on my puzzle rating, I just got stuck. And it was taking me 5, sometimes 8 or 10 minutes to solve one puzzle. And I was getting half or more than half of them wrong at that point. So it just made sense for me. Go back, start at the beginning, work my way back up. And that's what I'm in the process of now. So, next puzzle. Most of these at the lower rating we know are going to be checkmates. This one I do have a check on the back rank, but the king escapes. I suppose I could then check again, but then they would block with the pawn. But then I would check there, and I think that would be mate. Okay. I had to notice that this diagonal was open at that point, but that I could get to it, and the only way they could stop it was with that pawn, and then I would get there. So let's continue. Okay. Here I also have a checkmate. It's going to involve a stop first to force the king away from defending this square. Right now, both the king and the queen are defending f8. But I can force the king away from it with this initial check, and then once it moves, I can check and then mate here with the rook. Okay, that's a fairly common pattern in back rank checkmates, which I became familiar with from reading that book, Bobby Fischer Teaches Chess, which is less focused on chess itself and more focused just on these checkmates, very often on the back rank or on the edge of the board. Next. Okay, that puzzle was only rated 921, interestingly. Okay, I'm playing with the white pieces. And that's just checkmate. Okay, I paused a little bit to be sure, but my king cuts off all 3 of these squares, even if this pawn wasn't here. That would have been checkmate. I also just checked briefly to make sure that none of the opponent's pieces could interpose in any way, and they couldn't. So, all right, next. As you can see, I have moved my microphone. It was in a slightly different place. I'm working on trying to clear my desktop area, and hopefully that light isn't distracting. If it turns out to be, I can move it. But anyway, that was just me personally trying to move some things around. Here, I have a couple of different checks. I'm not sure which one would be better. This check, I think, on e6 can be blocked really easily with the queen. But then I would have a follow-up check, bishop to g6, but then the king could just move out. I could start with bishop to g6, or queen to g6 for that matter. That one almost seems better. I think starting with the bishop might be better because that leaves only two legal moves. Either the queen would block, which I doubt, or the king has to move. And the king can't move here because my queen cuts off those squares, and here, whoops, and here. So the king would be forced to move forward. And then I think moving my queen there would be mate. Okay. Because from here, of course, my queen cuts off all available paths from the king, and it's protected by my bishop, and the pawn guards that square. Okay, we have cracked 1200, which I kind of expected to happen during this video. I think we might be able to get to 1300, but I don't want to guarantee it here. I think we just have a simple checkmate on the board, because our king is not in a direct opposition to their king, but it did cut off two of the possible escape squares, and our pawn cut off the other one. And of course, no enemy or opponent piece could get in the way. Looks like we don't have any checks, so we're going to look at captures. There is, of course, a capture here. There's also a pawn fork, but I think if we played the pawn fork, the opponent would take our bishop, and while we were involved in taking the bishop back, then they could move their knight out of danger. So I think we should take the bishop first. The only way they can take back is with the queen, and then we will play the pawn fork. Okay, that was it. And then when the queen moves, we'll win the knight as well. The other option of the opponent at that point was just to not retake our bishop, but it was pointed at the queen. So they would have had to have moved their queen to the corner or something like that. Okay. And I'm glad I saw that I needed to delay the pawn fork rather than I almost played it immediately, but I needed to delay it because of what I already mentioned. And I'm trying not to repeat myself as much in these videos. Okay. The mistake with that one might be that it's not check, because I think we have a mate here on the back rank, and I don't think it's the rook moves first, because if we play the rook moves first, they take our rook, and then if we take back, they take back with their other rook. I think we need to take with this queen first on c1 check, and then they could block with their queen, but then we would just take it. So more likely, I think, is that they will recapture with their rook, and then we'll have this. And that couldn't be stopped. Okay, and I think the same thing would have happened if after we took their rook with our queen, if they had tried to block first, that would have been pointless. We would have just taken it. They still would have taken with their rook, their only remaining rook, and then we would have done the same thing with our two rooks. Okay, their king is kind of in the middle here. We're in check, so we have to do something about that. There's only one legal move, so it has to be taking the bishop. Or no, we have two legal moves. We could also capture the knight with our rook. But we do have to do one of those things. There's no other legal move right now, I'm pretty sure. I don't know which one is best. I think if we capture the bishop, not only can they check us again with the knight, but they could check us again with the queen. And if they check us again with the queen, yeah, if we take the bishop, they check us again with the queen. And then we have to go here. I think. Yeah, we have to go back. And then queen to the corner wouldn't work, because then we would take the knight. But I'm thinking that this is the better move, because then There is not a follow-up check. Their queen is hanging. And also our rook would be pointed at this square, where our queen is also pointed at that square. Oh, but our queen is hanging too. Wow. Okay, so this one's... I'm going to take a moment on this one, knowing that I'm only going to get 5 points for it if I solve it. Well, our first move, again, has to be one of those two moves. There's no question, because we are in check. We can't move our king here because of the bishop guarding that square. The only place we can move our king is here to capture the bishop. And the only other way to get out of check is to capture the checking piece, and the only piece we can capture with is the rook. So it's definitely one of those two moves to start the puzzle. So I just have to determine which one is best. I think I'm going to go back to what I already said. I think it's the rook capturing because there are no follow-up checks. Whereas if we capture with the king, there is a follow-up check which gets their queen out of danger. And then when we move out of check, our only legal move at that point, then they take our queen. So I think this is best. Then if they take our queen, we take theirs. And if they move their queen, we can move ours. I didn't expect that. I didn't expect them to take our bishop, but I guess I should have. Because they had determined that they were going to lose their queen anyway. Why, though? Couldn't they have just moved it? This puzzle's more complex than I gave it credit for, but I did know it was difficult already. And we are in check, so we have to respond to that. We can respond to that in 1, 2, 3, 4 legal ways. I think the most obvious and most natural is to just capture back, but I want to check the others to be sure. One way to get out of this is just to take the bishop. But then they take our rook. Pretty sure. Another way to get out of it is to put our rook in the way, so that when they take our rook, we will capture back. And then one other way is to block with the knight, in which case they will take our rook. I assume. Or would they take our queen at that point? That's interesting. If we block with the knight, their queen is trapped, isn't it? Well, they'd take our rook, but then our knight would be undefended. Now, I was going to say, because the bishop guards this pawn, and the knight from down there would be guarding this pawn, but nothing's guarding this pawn, and nothing would be guarding the knight after they took our rook. But if they take our rook, we have this check protected by this rook. If we take their queen, I assume they're going to take our queen. I know some of the higher rated players that occasionally watch my videos are probably laughing at me right now, but this is why I need to do puzzles, because some of these situations aren't very obvious to me. I can't move my queen right now because I'm in check. And if I take their bishop to get out of check, wait, maybe that's it. Because then that's another piece gone. If I take their bishop to get out of check, that makes up for them taking my bishop here. And then if they take my queen, I take their queen. If I take their bishop and they take my rook, I could take their rook, or I could check here, which would be very close to checkmate. Very close. Not quite, but close. So I think it's one of those two things. I just think I come out better if I take the bishop first. If I take the queen first, they take my queen. Then I could take the bishop, but they can check me. I take the bishop and they take my queen. I take their queen. Or maybe it comes out the same either way, in which case, why is the puzzle still ongoing? I'm going to take the bishop. Oh, wow. Okay. Well, I got it wrong. Fortunately, I only lost 6 points, but let's retry. Okay, so it's taking the queen then. Okay, and then they took my queen. Then I take the bishop. Okay, now I have to go to the analysis board to find out why that order was important. Let's go back to the analysis board and the first move of the puzzle. Here it says black had a -8 advantage until they played that, and that gave us, white, a +5 advantage. And only one move maintains that. Okay, well, I definitely made the right choice here because it says if I took the bishop, they would check, but they wouldn't check where I thought. They would check here. I thought they would have checked on the... Yeah, if I took the bishop, they would have checked on e5, it says. That's interesting. Then I would have had to have gone back to g1, and then they would have checked me over here with the knight. Okay, that got pretty complicated, but that was the reason I discarded that, was because they could check me again. So I did the right thing here. And their best move, wow, okay, Stockfish says their best move was to take the bishop. I was surprised by that. I didn't know what else they could have. I thought maybe they would take my queen then, but then I would have taken their queen. But taking my queen is not on their top, not in their top 3. How about that? Well, let's just out of curiosity, if they took my queen, I think pretty sure I would have taken theirs. And that, okay, and that would have come with check. And when they moved out of check, then I would have gotten their bishop as well. Okay, so to back up, they did not take my queen. They took my bishop. And I think I determined that at the end, we both lost our queens, and I lost... And I got their bishop either way, right? Because if I took their bishop, they were going to take my queen, and I was going to take theirs. So why was that wrong? If I take their bishop, they're not going to take my queen. They're going to rescue their queen with check. And when I move out of check, then they're going to take my queen. Okay, got it. Okay, so that's why I had to take their queen first. And then they would take mine. And then I would take their bishop. And then wouldn't they check me? It says they might. And then I would just go back to g1. Or even g3 wouldn't be bad. How about that? Okay. Well, just to replay this puzzle, I had to do this. Then I had to take their queen. And then take their bishop. Okay. Lost 6 points. Next puzzle. As you can see, that puzzle is rated 1005, and I just ruined it. Okay. My thinking was that if I checked with this pawn, what was I thinking? They would escape here, and then I would have mate. But why didn't it work with the other pawn? Because I knew this was the first move, because they only had one legal move. My bishop cuts off these squares. But what's wrong with If I move that pawn, doesn't the same thing happen? Oh, then they can escape this way. That's why it has to be this pawn, because it guards this escape square. Okay. Well, I've lost 2 in a row, so this just confirms my opinion, my plan of coming back to the lower rated puzzles, that I still needed work here before I fully advanced to the 2300 level, where I was really struggling. Okay. Well, I do have a check here. And the king has to move over, and the next move is mate. Because none of my pieces are pinned, and they can't block that. Okay, that one was really easy. I'm surprised that one was rated 800 and something, but it should have been rated maybe 400. But maybe it felt easy because I've gotten better, because I've learned. But yeah, where I had both my rook and my queen pointed at f2. So to me, that seemed simple enough. Next puzzle. We do have a check. We have a couple of checks. One is with the knight, but I think that one runs into the queen just capturing. The knight could also check in here, but that would result in the pawn capturing, I think. I mean, or the king could just move. Down here, the king wouldn't just move, because then we would get the rook. But in here, the king could just move, or the pawn could take. Interesting. There's also this check, and the only reason I'm considering it is because so many puzzles start off with a queen sacrifice. Oh no, I just saw it. Undefended queen. Okay. That took me too long. Just to restart this puzzle. This one didn't work because the queen captures it, and then I don't have a follow-up. This one works because the queen can't capture it, and even though the pawn could capture or the king could move, the moving our knight opened up the discovered attack on their undefended queen. Okay. So I did see that at the last minute, and that was it. Okay, we're at 23 minutes or so, so let's keep going. Where is their king? There is their king. Do we have a check? We have a couple of checks, and we are not ourselves in check. One temptation here would be to take the free piece. However, we might have a mating sequence here, because our bishop moving to d6 leaves their king only one legal move. Our rook cuts off these squares. They could block with their bishop, but we would just take it and leave them in the same situation. They could block with their pawn, but we would just take it and leave them in the same situation. So assuming they didn't try those intermediary moves of moving their bishop and pawn first, but if they do, we will just take them, and then move their king, if they move their king, we would have a follow-up check with our bishop, and then they would have to move their king here, and then I don't know what we have. That's interesting. We would also, once they moved, have the follow-up check with our rook on g3. But then they could go back or forward. So now I'm not sure if that's the best one or not. There's also the question of whether I should move this bishop first to cut off that square so that this would be mate once the bishop and pawn blocked. But if I do that first, that's not check, and then our opponent can respond in some way. For example, they could block with their bishop first before we can put our bishop down there. So that leaves me very unsure, especially now that I've failed a couple of puzzles. So my confidence is shaken a little bit, but I'm pretty sure it's not just taking that knight. We can take the knight anyway, after the check. We can take it with our king, we can take it with the pawn, even after we move our bishop. But if we do the move that I suggested, possibly to block off the h3 square, if I play that first, well, then the knight gets away, and it would be guarding where we want to move our dark squared bishop. So it might just be taking that piece. Let's see. We have two bishops. They have two bishops. We only have one rook, and they have two rooks. We only have one knight, and they have two knights. So it's not just taking the knight. It can't be that. I've never seen any puzzle ever where taking a free piece was the solution if we were this far down in material. The only time I've ever seen that be the solution is when it would put us ahead in material or bring us back to even. I think I've seen that maybe once, and I've seen it 5 or 10 times where it puts us ahead in material because they've blundered a piece. But I've never seen it where taking the free piece is the answer if it leaves us still behind. So I am certain that that's not it. So it's going to be a check or a mating attack of some kind. I don't think the rook check makes any sense because they just take it. If they take it with the bishop, and then we check, they start running out of squares pretty quick. No, it's not that. It's got to be the bishop check. Okay, they blocked with the bishop, which means they're afraid of a checkmate. Okay. If they had moved... That's insane. Okay. That surprises me. Because we talked about they could have just moved and I could have checked again, and then what would happen if they moved here? The fact that they blocked with the bishop and just gave it up tells me that I had a mating attack here, but I don't know what it is. So I'm going to go to the analysis board. They were way ahead, and they should have checked me, it says. Here, probably. Yeah, bishop to e5. But instead, they took our knight. And, okay, since we have mate in 5, if we start here, bishop to d6, which we did, and their best move is to block it. But I want to know, what happens if they go here? We had said we could go to bishop to f5 check. Then they have to go here. Oh, and then our mate's down there. Okay, that's what I wasn't seeing, was where our mate was. Okay, well, that takes care of that. I have time for another puzzle. Anywhere we move the knight is check. About to lose the rook. I want to move the knight here so it's a double check, which means that they then couldn't capture our knight with the pawn, because both the bishop and the knight would be checking the king. So capturing either piece, because they're both hanging right now. But this means they can't capture either one because both are checking. So they would have to move the king to the corner. And then we have mate. Okay. I have time for a couple of more. I'm actually not really. But I'm going to keep going just a little longer and see if I can't hit 1300, which would be a good stopping place. This looks like we have check here. They have two choices. They could capture with the rook or move the king. If they capture with the rook, of course, we would take it, and then they would have to move the king. Then we could follow with a check with our queen. No, not there, here. So check, I think we need to start with that. But what if they move first? If they move first, we have this check. Then if they block with the other pawn, we have mate here. If they don't move first after this check, if they capture back with their rook, we capture back with our other rook, then they have to move it. Okay. And then again, we have this check, which they can't block except with the pawn. And then this is mate. Okay. 21 more points. I think we can do that. Hopefully, if I don't fail any more puzzles. We can check here. That is not mate, but it's getting close because they can't block. Well, they can block that with their bishop. But if they did, then we would have mate here with our queen. And if we check there and they move their king, then we still have mate here with our queen. I've got to take it first because the bishop's guarding that square. You saw that. Oh my goodness. I almost put my queen there before taking the bishop. Very interesting. One more, and let's do this. Okay, that is not quite mate because... Wait. Yeah, that is mate. Because we're not in check. Okay, we broke 1300. Sorry, it threw me off a little bit because it was just one move. And that puzzle has a pending rating. So I'm assuming that puzzle's rating is going to go down after several more people have solved it because it is a mate in one, which I will add the theme for. It does not have a theme. Okay, well, thank you for watching. If you have gotten to a point in your puzzle solving where you've stagnated or plateaued, whatever verb you want to use, and you feel like it's taking longer and longer to solve puzzles, or you're solving a smaller and smaller percentage of them, why not just hit that puzzle reset button, which you can find in your settings under puzzles, at least in the browser, and start over at 400 and work your way back up like I'm doing now. This is much more rewarding emotionally for me than just working away at those, toiling on those really high-rated puzzles that I wasn't understanding. Even some of the ones I got right, I wasn't understanding. So I'll get there again eventually, but hopefully I'll get a little further this time. But thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.